Caesar Augustus, Part I of the Lives of the 12 Caesars by Gaius Suetonius, Tranquillus. This is the LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Lives of the 12 Caesars by Gaius Suetonius Tranquillus. Translated by Alexander Thompson and edited by T. Forrester. Caesar Augustus, Part I, paragraph 1 through 17. That the family of the Octavii was of the first distinction in Veletri is rendered evident by many circumstances. For in the most frequented part of the town there was, not long since, a street named the Octavian, and an altar was to be seen consecrated to one Octavius, who, being appointed general in a war with some neighboring people, the enemy making a sudden attack, while he was sacrificing to Mars, he immediately snatched the entrails of the victim from off the fire and offered them half raw upon the altar, after which, marching off to battle, he returned victorious. This incident gave rise to a law, by which it was enacted that in all future times the entrails should be offered to Mars in the same manner, and the rest of the victim should be carried to the Octavii. This family, as well as several in Rome, was admitted to the Senate by Tarquinius Priscus, and afterwards placed by Servius Tullius among the patricians. But in process of time it transferred itself to the plebeian order, and, after the lapse of a long interval, was restored by Julius Caesar to the rank of patricians. The first person of the family raised by the suffrages of the people to the magistracy was Gaius Rufus. He obtained the quaestorship and had two sons, Cneius and Gaius, from whom are descended the two branches of the Octavian family, which have had very different fortunes. For Cneius and his descendants in uninterrupted succession held all the highest offices of the state, whilst Gaius and his posterity, whether from their circumstances or their choice, remained in the equestrian order until the father of Augustus. The great-grandfather of Augustus served as a military tribune in the Second Punic War in Sicily under the command of Aemilius Pappus. His grandfather contented himself with bearing the public offices of his own municipality, and grew old in the tranquil enjoyment of an ample patrimony. Such is the account given by different authors. Augustus himself, however, tells us nothing more than he was descended of an equestrian family, both ancient and rich, of which his father was the first who obtained the rank of a senator. Mark Antony upbraidingly tells him that his great-grandfather was a freedman of the territory of Thurium, and a rope-maker, and his grandfather a usurer. This is all the information I have anywhere met with respecting the ancestors of Augustus by his father's side. His father, Gaius Octavius, was, from his earliest years, a person both of opulence and distinction, for which reason I am surprised at those who say he was a money-dealer, and was employed in scattering bribes and canvassing for the candidates at elections in the Campus Martius. For being bred up in all the affluence of a great estate, he obtained with ease to honorable posts, and discharged the duties of them with much distinction. After his praetorship he obtained by lot the province of Macedonia, in his way to which he cut off some of the banditti, the relics of the armies of Spartacus and Catiline, who had possessed themselves of the territory of Thurium, having received from the Senate an extraordinary commission for that purpose. In his government of the province he conducted himself with equal justice and resolution, for he defeated the Bessians and Thracians in a great battle, and treated the allies of the republic in such a manner that there are extant letters from Marcus Tullius Cicero, in which he advises and exhorts his brother Quintus, who then held the proconsulship of Asia with no great reputation, to imitate the example of his neighbor Octavius in gaining the affections of the allies of Rome. After quitting Macedonia, before he could declare himself a candidate for the consulship, he died suddenly, leaving behind him a daughter, the elder Octavia, by Ancaria, and another daughter, Octavia the younger, as well as Augustus, by Attia, who was the daughter of Marcus Attius Balbus, and Julia, sister to Gaius Julius Caesar. Balbus was, by the father's side, of a family who were natives of Aricia, and many of whom had been in the Senate. By the mother's side he was nearly related to Pompey the Great, and after he had borne the office of praetor, was one of the 20 commissioners appointed by the Julian law to divide the land in Campania among the people. But Mark Antony, treating with contempt Augustus's descent even by his mother's side, says that his great-grandfather was of African descent, and had one time kept a perfumer's shop, and at another a bakehouse in Aricia. And Cassius of Parma, in a letter, taxes Augustus with being the son not only of a baker, but a usurer. These are his words: "Thou art a lump of thy mother's meal, which a money-changer of Nerulum, taking from the newest bakehouse of Aricia, kneaded into some shape with his hands all discolored by the fingering of money." Augustus was born in the consulship of Marcus Tullius Cicero and Gaius Antonius, upon the 9th of the calends of October (23rd September), a little before sunrise, in the quarter of the Palatine Hill and the street called the Ox Heads, where now stands a chapel dedicated to him, and built a little after his death. For, as it is recorded in the proceedings of the Senate, when Gaius Laetorius, a young man of patrician family, in pleading before the senators for a lighter sentence, upon being convicted of adultery, alleged, besides his youth and quality, that he was the possessor, and as it were the guardian, of the ground which the divine Augustus first touched upon coming into the world, and entreated that he might find favor for the sake of that deity, who was in a peculiar manner his, an act of the Senate was passed for the consecration of that part of his house in which Augustus was born. His nursery is shown to this day, in a villa belonging to the family in the suburbs of Velatrae, being a very small place, and much like a pantry. An opinion prevails in the neighborhood that he was also born there. Into this place no person presumes to enter, unless upon necessity, and with great devotion, from a belief, for a long time prevalent, that such as rashly enter it are seized with great horror and consternation, which a short time since was confirmed by a remarkable incident. For when a new inhabitant of the house had, either by mere chance or to try the truth of the report, taken up his lodging in that apartment, in the course of the night, a few hours afterwards, he was thrown out by some sudden violence, he knew not how, and was found in a state of stupefaction, with a coverlid for his bed, before the door of the chamber. While he was yet an infant, the surname of Thurinus was given him, in memory of the birthplace of his family, or because, soon after he was born, his father Octavius had been successful against the fugitive slaves in the country near Thurium. That he was surnamed Thurinus I can affirm upon good foundation, for when a boy I had a small bronze statue of him, with that name upon it in iron letters, nearly effaced by age, which I presented to the emperor, by whom it is now revered amongst the other tutelar deities in his chamber. He is also often called Thurinus contemptuously by Mark Antony in his letters, to which he makes only this reply: "I am surprised that my former name should be made a subject of reproach." He afterwards assumed the name of Gaius Caesar, and then of Augustus, the former in compliance with the will of his great uncle, and the latter upon the motion of Munatius Plancus in the Senate. For when some proposed to confer upon him the name of Romulus, as being in a manner a second founder of the city, it was resolved that he should rather be called Augustus, a surname not only new, but of more dignity, because places devoted to religion, and those in which anything is consecrated by augury, are denominated August, either from the word auctus, signifying augmentation, or ab avium gestu, gestuve, from the flight and feeding of birds, as appears from this verse of Aeneas: "When glorious Rome by august augury was built." He lost his father when he was only 4 years of age, and in his 12th year pronounced a funeral oration in praise of his grandmother Julia. 4 years afterwards, having assumed the robe of manhood, he was honored with several military rewards by Caesar in his African triumph, although he took no part in the war on account of his youth. Upon his uncle's expedition to Spain against the sons of Pompey, he was followed by his nephew, although he was scarcely recovered from a dangerous sickness, and after being shipwrecked at sea and traveling with very few attendants through roads that were infested with the enemy, he at last came up with him. This activity gave great satisfaction to his uncle, who soon conceived an increasing affection for him on account of such indications of character. After the subjugation of Spain, while Caesar was meditating an expedition against the Dacians and Parthians, he was sent before him to Apollonia, where he applied himself to his studies, until receiving intelligence that his uncle was murdered, and that he was appointed his heir. He hesitated for some time whether he should call to his aid the legions stationed in the neighborhood, but he abandoned the design as rash and premature. However, returning to Rome, he took possession of his inheritance, although his mother was apprehensive that such a measure might be attended with danger, and his stepfather, Marcus Philippus, a man of consular rank, very earnestly dissuaded him from it. From this time, collecting together a strong military force, he first held the government in conjunction with Mark Antony and Marcus Lepidus, then with Antony only, for nearly 12 years, and at last in his own hands during a period of 44. Having thus given a very short summary of his life, I shall prosecute the several parts of it, not in order of time, but arranging his acts into distinct classes for the sake of perspicuity. He was engaged in 5 civil wars, namely those of Modena, Philippi, Perugia, Sicily, and Actium, the first and last of which were against Antony, the second against Brutus and Cassius, the third against Lucius Antonius, the triumvir's brother, and the fourth against Sextus Pompeius, the son of Cnaeus Pompeius. The motive which gave rise to all these wars was the opinion he entertained that both his honor and interest were concerned in revenging the murder of his uncle, and maintaining the state of affairs he had established. Immediately after his return from Apollonia, he formed the design of taking forcible and unexpected measures against Brutus and Cassius, but they, having foreseen the danger and made their escape, he resolved to proceed against them by an appeal to the laws in their absence, and impeach them for the murder. In the meantime, those whose province it was to prepare the sports in honor of Caesar's last victory in the civil war, not daring to do it, he undertook it himself, and that he might carry into effect his other designs with greater authority, he declared himself a candidate in the room of a tribune of the people, who happened to die at that time, although he was of a patrician family and had not yet been in the Senate. But the consul, Mark Antony, from whom he had expected the greatest assistance, opposing him in his suit, and even refusing to do him so much as common justice, unless gratified with a large bribe, he went over to the party of the nobles, to whom he perceived Sulla to be odious, chiefly for endeavoring to drive Decius Brutus, whom he had besieged in the town of Modena, out of the province, which had been given him by Caesar, and confirmed to him by the Senate, at the instigation of persons about him, and he engaged some ruffians to murder his antagonist, but the plot being discovered, and dreading a similar attempt upon himself, he gained over Caesar's veteran soldiers, by distributing among them all the money he could collect. Being now commissioned by the Senate to command the troops he had gathered, with the rank of praetor, and in conjunction with Hortius and Pansa, who had accepted the consulship, to carry the assistance to Decius Brutus, he put an end to the war by 2 battles in 3 months. Antony writes that in the former of these he ran away, and 2 days afterwards made his appearance, without his general's cloak and his horse. In the last battle, however, it is certain that he performed the part not only of a general but a soldier, for in the heat of battle, when the standard-bearer of his legion was severely wounded, he took the eagle upon his shoulders and carried it a long time. In this war, Hirtius being slain in battle, and Pansa dying a short time afterwards of a wound, a report was circulated that they both were killed through his means, in order that, when Antony fled, the republic having lost its consuls, he might have the victorious armies entirely at his own command. The death of Pansa was so fully believed to have been caused by undue means, that Glyco, his surgeon, was placed in custody, on a suspicion of having poisoned his wound, and to this Aquilius Niger adds, that he killed Hirtius, the other consul, in the confusion of the battle, with his own hands. But upon intelligence that Antony, after his defeat, had been received by Marcus Lepidus, and the rest of the generals and armies had all declared for the Senate, he, without any hesitation, deserted from the party of the nobles, alleging as an excuse for his conduct the actions and sayings of several amongst them, for some said he was a mere boy. Others threw out that he ought to be promoted to honors and cut off, to avoid making any suitable acknowledgment either to him or to the veteran legions, and the more to testify his regret for having before attached himself to the other faction, he fined the Nursini in a large sum of money, which they were unable to pay, and then expelled them from the town, for having inscribed upon a monument erected at the public charge to their countrymen who were slain in the battle of Modena, that they all fell in the cause of liberty. Having entered into a conference with Antony and Lepidus, he brought the war at Philippi to an end in 2 battles, although he was at that time weak and suffering from sickness. In the first battle he was driven from his camp, and with some difficulty made his escape to the wing of the army commanded by Antony. And now, intoxicated with success, he sent the head of Brutus to be cast at the floor of Caesar's statue, and treated the most illustrious of the prisoners not only with cruelty, but with abusive language, insomuch as he is said to have answered one of them, who humbly entreated that at least he might not remain unburied, "That will be in the power of the birds." 2 others, father and son, who begged for their lives, he ordered to cast lots, which of them should live, or to settle it between themselves by the sword, and was the spectator of both their deaths; for the father offering his life to save his son, and being accordingly executed, the son likewise killed himself upon the spot. On this account the rest of the prisoners, and among them Marcus Favonius, Cato's rival, being led up in fetters, after they had saluted Antony, the general, with much respect, reviled Octavius in the foulest language. After this victory, dividing between them the offices of the state, Mark Antony undertook to restore the order in the East, while Caesar conducted the veteran soldiers back to Italy, and settled them in colonies on the lands belonging to the municipalities. But he had the misfortune to please neither the soldiers nor the owners of the lands, one party complaining of the injustice done them in being violently ejected from their possessions, and the other that they were not rewarded according to their merit. At this time he obliged Lucius Antony, who, presuming upon his own authority as consul and his brother's power, was raising new commotions, to fly to Perugia, and forced him by famine to surrender at last, although not without having been exposed to great hazards both before the war and during its continuance. For a common soldier having got into the seats of the equestrian order and the theatre at the public spectacles, Caesar ordered him to be removed by an officer, and a rumor being thus spread by his enemies that he had put the man to death by torture, the soldiers flocked together, so much enraged that he narrowly escaped with his life. The only thing that saved him was the sudden appearance of the man, safe and sound, no violence having been offered him; and whilst he was sacrificing under the walls of Perugia, he nearly fell into the hands of a body of gladiators who sallied out of the town. After taking Perugia, he sentenced a great number of prisoners to death, making only one reply to all who implored pardon, or endeavored to excuse themselves: "You must die." Some authors write that 300 of the 2 orders, selected from the rest, were slaughtered like victims before an altar raised to Julius Caesar upon the Ides of March. Nay, there are some who relate that he entered upon the war with no other view than that his secret enemies, and those whom fear more than affection kept quiet, might be detected by declaring themselves, now that they had an opportunity, with Lucius Antony at their head, and that having defeated them and confiscated their estates, he might be enabled to fulfill his promises to the veteran soldiers. He soon commenced the Sicilian war, but it was protracted by various delays during a long period; at one time for the purpose of repairing his fleets, which he twice lost by storm even in the summer; at another while patching up a peace, to which he was forced by the clamors of the people, in consequence of a famine occasioned by Pompey's cutting off the supply of corn by sea; but at last, having built a new fleet, and obtained 20,000 manumitted slaves, who were given him for the oar, he formed the Julian harbor at Baiae, by letting the sea into the Lucrine and Avernian lakes; and having exercised his forces there during the whole winter, he defeated Pompey betwixt Mylae and Naubolus, although, just as the engagement commenced, he suddenly fell into such a profound sleep that his friends were obliged to wake him to give the signal. This, I suppose, gave occasion for Antony's reproach: "You were not better able to take a clear view of the fleet when drawn up in line of battle, but lay stupidly upon your back, gazing up at the sky; nor did you get up and let your men see you until Marcus Agrippa had forced the enemy's ships to sheer off." Others imputed to him both a saying and an action, which were indefensible; for upon the loss of his fleets by storm he is reported to have said, I will conquer in spite of Neptune. And at the next Circensian games he would not suffer the statue of that god to be carried in procession as usual. Indeed, he scarcely ever ran more or greater risks in any of his wars than in this. Having transported part of his army to Sicily, and being on his return for the rest, he was unexpectedly attacked by Demarches and Apollophanes, Pompey's admirals, from whom he escaped with great difficulty and with one ship only. Likewise, as he was travelling on foot through the Locrian territory to Rhegium, seeing two of Pompey's vessels passing by that coast, and supposing them to be on his own, he went down to the shore and was very nearly taken prisoner. On this occasion, as he was making his escape by some byways, a slave belonging to Aemilius Paulus, who, accompanying him, owing him a grudge for the proscription of Paulus, the father of Aemilius, and thinking he had now the opportunity of revenging it, attempted to assassinate him. After the defeat of Pompey, one of his colleagues, Marcus Lepidus, whom he had summoned to his aid from Africa, affecting great superiority because he was at the head of 20 legions, and claiming for himself the principal management of affairs in a threatening manner, he divested him of his command, but upon his humble submission granted him his life, but banished him for life to Circeii. The alliance between him and Antony, which had always been precarious, often interrupted, and ill cemented by repeated reconciliations, he at last entirely dissolved; and to make it known to the world how far Antony had degenerated from patriotic feelings, he caused a will of his, which had been left at Rome, in which he had nominated Cleopatra's children amongst others as his heirs, to be opened and read in an assembly of the people. Yet upon his being declared an enemy, he sent to him all his relations and friends, among whom were Gaius Sosius and Titus Domitius, at that time consuls. He likewise spoke favorably in public of the people of Bologna, for joining in the association with the rest of Italy to support his cause, because they had in former times been under the protection of the family of the Antonii. And not long afterwards he defeated him in a naval engagement near Actium, which was prolonged to so late an hour that, after the victory, he was obliged to sleep on board his ship. From Actium he went to the isle of Samoa to winter, but being alarmed with the accounts of a mutiny amongst the soldiers he had selected from the main body of his army sent to Brundisium after the victory, who insisted on their being rewarded for their service and discharged, he returned to Italy. In his passage thither he encountered 2 violent storms, the first being between the promontories of Peloponnesus and Aetolia, and the other about the Ceraunian mountains, in both of which a part of his Liburnian squadron was sunk, the spars and riggings of his own ships carried away, and the rudder broken in pieces. He remained only 27 days at Brundisium, until the demands of the soldiers were settled, and then went by way of Asia and Syria to Egypt, where, laying siege to Alexandria, whither Antony had fled with Cleopatra, he made himself master of it in a short time. He drove Antony to kill himself, after he had used every effort to obtain conditions of peace, and he saw his corpse. Cleopatra he anxiously wished to save for his triumph, and when she was supposed to have been bit to death by an asp, he sent for the Psylli to endeavor to suck out the poison. He allowed them to be buried together in the same grave, and ordered a mausoleum begun by themselves to be completed. The eldest of Antony's 2 sons by Fulvia he commanded to be taken from the statue of Julius Caesar, to which he had fled, after many fruitless supplications for his life, and put him to death. The same fate attended Cesario, Cleopatra's son by Caesar, as he pretended, who had fled for his life, but was retaken. The children which Antony had by Cleopatra he saved, and brought up and cherished in a manner suitable to their rank, just as if they had been his own relations. End of Caesar Augustus, Part 1.